Let's take a step back in time. If you were to compress the entire history of life on Earth into a single 24-hour day, mammals would have only been the dominant land animals for about 38 minutes. That's it. Just over half an hour in a full day. Before that, for nearly 2 hours of our compressed day, dinosaurs ruled the planet. But what came before them? What strange and terrifying creatures did the very first mammals have to deal with? When we talk about the first true mammals, we're looking at small, mostly nocturnal creatures that evolved roughly 200 million years ago during the late Triassic period. These weren't the mammals you're picturing, no dogs, cats, or anything remotely like us. They were tiny shrew-like animals, most no bigger than a mouse, scurrying around in a world completely dominated by reptiles. And what a world it was! These little guys weren't exactly at the top of the food chain. They were living in the shadows, quite literally, of some of the most bizarre and dangerous animals that ever existed. Their daily lives were basically a non-stop horror movie. Let's start with one of the most obvious threats, the early dinosaurs. While not yet the giants they would later become, early dinosaurs like Coelophysis were already formidable predators. Picture a slender, agile hunter about 10 feet long with sharp teeth and claws, perfectly designed to catch small prey. These early dinosaurs were quick, with hollow bones that made them surprisingly light for their size. They had excellent vision and could likely spot even the smallest movement in the underbrush. But dinosaurs were just one of many problems. The early mammals also had to contend with the ruling reptiles of the time, the Pseudosuchians. These were relatives of modern crocodiles, but far more diverse. Some walked on 2 legs, others on 4, and they came in all shapes and sizes. One particularly nasty example was Postosuchus, a creature that looked like a crocodile decided to become a T-rex. Standing about 13 feet long and weighing around 1,500 pounds, it walked on 2 legs with its body held horizontal, had powerful jaws filled with serrated teeth, and was likely the apex predator in many environments. A single Postosuchus could easily gobble up dozens of early mammals without even feeling full. Then there were the Rauisuchians, massive quadrupedal predators that could reach lengths of over 20 feet. These monsters had skulls nearly 3 feet long filled with teeth designed to rip flesh. They were essentially the tanks of their time, with heavy armor plating and powerful limbs. If an early mammal spotted one of these, its only hope was to hide and pray it wasn't noticed. The skies weren't safe either. While pterosaurs were just beginning to evolve, there were already other flying reptiles around. Early pterosaurs like Eudomorphodon had wingspans of about 3 feet and were skilled aerial hunters, perfectly capable of snatching up a small mammal that ventured out in the open during daylight hours. Even the water was full of dangers. Massive marine reptiles like nothosaurs patrolled the coastlines. These long-necked swimmers could reach lengths of up to 13 feet and had sharp teeth perfect for catching fish, or any small mammal unfortunate enough to be caught swimming. But perhaps the most terrifying creatures from a small mammal's perspective weren't even the giant predators. It was the more medium-sized hunters that specifically targeted small prey. Animals like the cynodont Cynognathes, ironically, a close relative of mammals themselves. About the size of a wolf with a heavy skull and powerful jaw muscles, these predators were specifically adapted to hunt and eat small animals like our early mammal ancestors. And we can't forget about the massive amphibians. While amphibians today are generally small and harmless, the late Triassic still had some monsters left over from earlier times. Creatures like Mastodonsaurus, which despite its name was not a dinosaur but a giant amphibian that could grow up to 20 feet long with a skull nearly 4 feet in length. These ambush predators lurked in rivers and lakes, ready to snap up anything that came to drink. Even insects posed a serious threat. This was a time of giant dragonflies with wingspans of over 2 feet, massive scorpions, and centipedes the size of snakes. For a mammal the size of a mouse, even these invertebrates were dangerous predators. So how did our tiny ancestors survive in this nightmare world? They had a few advantages. First, they were warm-blooded in a world of mostly cold-blooded reptiles. This meant they could be active at night when temperatures dropped and most reptiles became sluggish. They also had fur for insulation, allowing them to remain active during cooler periods when reptiles had to bask in the sun. Their small size, while making them vulnerable, also allowed them to hide in places large predators couldn't reach. Burrows, hollow trees, dense underbrush, these became the safe zones for early mammals. They also likely had better hearing and smell than most reptiles, giving them early warning when predators were approaching. But perhaps their greatest advantage was their brains. Even these early mammals had larger brains relative to their body size than the reptiles around them. They could learn, adapt, and pass on knowledge in ways their predators couldn't match. This intelligence didn't make them safe, but it gave them an edge, the ability to recognize patterns, remember dangerous areas, and find new ways to survive. The world changed dramatically about 201 million years ago when the Triassic period ended with a major extinction event. Many of the ruling reptiles disappeared, including most of the Pseudosuchians and many other predators. This opened up new opportunities for both dinosaurs and mammals. Dinosaurs, of course, took full advantage and became the new dominant land animals. But mammals continued to evolve too, gradually diversifying while still remaining relatively small throughout the age of dinosaurs. It's worth noting that this pattern of mammals living in the shadow of larger, more dominant animals would continue for over 150 million years. Throughout the entire Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs, mammals remained mostly small, nocturnal creatures. It wasn't until after the dinosaurs disappeared 66 million years ago that mammals finally had their chance to diversify into the myriad forms we see today. But let's get back to those early days and talk about one of the strangest creatures that our early mammal ancestors would have encountered, Tanystropheus. Imagine a reptile with a neck that made up half its entire body length. We're talking about an animal that was around 20 feet long, but nearly 10 feet of that was just neck, a thin, rigid neck that couldn't bend much. It looked like something a child might draw if you asked them to create a new animal. Scientists have debated for years about how this bizarre creature lived. The current thinking is that it was semi-aquatic, using its incredibly long neck to fish while keeping its body safely on shore or in shallow water. For a small mammal, this strange fishing reptile might not have been a direct threat, but it certainly would have been a bizarre sight. Another odd creature was Sharovipteryx, a gliding reptile that had a membrane stretched between its extremely long hind limbs, forming a sort of wing like a flying squirrel. Except the wing was behind its body rather than between its front and back limbs. It probably glided from tree to tree, and while not directly threatening to mammals, it represented yet another strange competitor in the trees. Then there was Longisquama, a small reptile with what appeared to be long, feather-like scales growing from its back. These structures may have been used for display, insulation, or even to help it glide. While only about 6 inches long, it shared the same small-bodied, insectivorous niche that many early mammals occupied, making it a direct competitor. The oceans of this time were perhaps even stranger than the land. Massive marine reptiles called ichthyosaurs had evolved to look remarkably like modern dolphins or sharks. A perfect example of convergent evolution, where unrelated animals evolved similar forms to adapt to similar environments. Some of these grew to enormous sizes, with Shonosaurus reaching lengths of up to 50 feet. For our small mammal ancestors, these marine monsters weren't a direct threat unless they ventured into the water. But other semi-aquatic reptiles like Nothosaurus would have been dangerous along shorelines. These 10-foot predators had long, tooth-filled snouts perfect for snatching prey from the water's edge. Even the plant eaters of this time were nothing like what we see today. Massive dicynodonts, distant relatives of mammals with turtle-like beaks, could grow to the size of rhinos. One genus, Lisowicia, reached nearly 15 feet long and weighed around 9 tons, making it one of the largest land animals of its time. While not predatory, an animal this size could easily crush a small mammal underfoot without even noticing. The plants themselves would have looked alien too. This was before flowering plants evolved, so there were no fruits, no flowers, and none of the grasses that cover so much of our modern landscape. Instead, the world was covered in ferns, cycads, ginkgos, and conifers. The forests would have been eerily quiet compared to modern ones. No bird songs, just the buzzing of insects and the calls of reptiles. So what did these early mammals actually look like? One of the best examples we have is Morganucodon, a small shrew-like creature about 4 inches long that lived about 205 million years ago. It had a long snout, tiny sharp teeth for catching insects, and likely a coat of fur. Its legs stuck out from the sides of its body rather than being tucked underneath like modern mammals, giving it a more reptilian stance. Another early mammal was Mesozoic, similar in appearance but with more specialized teeth that could not only pierce insect exoskeletons but also grind food, a key mammalian adaptation. These tiny creatures probably lived in burrows and were most active at night when their reptilian predators were less active. It's important to understand that these weren't some primitive, inferior version of modern mammals. They were highly adapted to their ecological niche, with senses and abilities that allowed them to survive in a world dominated by reptiles. Their small size wasn't a disadvantage, it was a successful strategy that allowed them to exploit resources the larger animals couldn't access. The story of these early mammals is really a lesson in survival against overwhelming odds. They weren't the strongest, the fastest, or the biggest. But they found their own path, exploiting the nighttime hours, developing better senses, and eventually evolving larger brains. They survived not by dominating their environment, but by finding the spaces between, the niches that other animals couldn't or wouldn't use. And in the end, this strategy paid off in ways they could never have imagined. When an asteroid struck the Earth 66 million years ago, the resulting climate change wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs and many other reptiles. But our small, adaptable mammal ancestors survived. In the aftermath, they diversified into countless forms, from tiny shrews to massive whales, from gliding squirrels to soaring bats, from swift cheetahs to clever primates. Every mammal alive today, including us, owes its existence to those tiny, furry survivors that somehow made it through one of the most dangerous periods in Earth's history. They weren't impressive by today's standards, but they were exactly what they needed to be for their time and place. And that, perhaps, is the most impressive thing of all. So the next time you look at your dog or cat, or catch a glimpse of a deer or squirrel, remember that you're looking at the descendants of tiny heroes, the little mammals that survived a world of monsters and lived to tell the tale.